Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. I'd like to start off by sharing one of my first models, a Bretonnian archer, painted with model car enamel paints and no primer. I didn't know what I was doing then, but my heart was in the right place. I always wanted a Bretonnian army, but I only had a few of these old archers. Now that the models are available again, I can finally make that army. Now I know some may say that according to Bretonnian lore, only the Green Knight has green in his heraldry, and no one else does. And while the lore is important to consider, this model means a lot more to me, and I want to stay true to that. Besides, this will be the only regiment with these colors. Everything else in my army will be different. So let's grab our brushes and paint some archers. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with a light zenithal style spray, beginning with gray primer, followed by white on the top and sides. You could just as easily undercoat your models with white or any other very light color and get great results too. I like to have a variety of skin tones in my armies, and I'll show you how you can get a few different shades with Darkoath flesh as a base. I painted a few of the models with Darkoath flesh right out of the pot. For a more pale tone, I diluted the Darkoath flesh with an equal amount of contrast medium. For a slightly darker tone, I mixed an equal amount of Gorthor brown into the Darkoath flesh. And for an even darker tone, I mixed equal amounts of Darkoath flesh and Dryad bark. Next I painted a layer of Reikland flesh shade to shade all of the skin tones. I want to get a couple different shades of leather, and this mix of equal parts Wyldwood and contrast medium will be a great start for both. I painted all the straps, shoes, pouches, and some of the vests. With that base coat dry, I painted over all the straps and shoes with a layer of black Templar. The brown base coat shows through a little bit, and the result is a very dark brown color, almost black. Then I painted the bows with Skeleton Horde. I want the overall color scheme for this unit to be yellow and green. These are peasants after all, and I don't think they can afford the brightest colored fabric, so I think a mix of muted colors will look good and fit the theme. For the main fabric color I used Nazdreg yellow, and I varied the placement around the models. The other main color is going to be green, and for that I'll be using Dark Angel's green. To add a little uniformity to the unit, I decided to make all of their hoods green. Work on one section at a time and soak up any extra paint with the brush. Be really careful along the edges, especially on the face. This is a really strong color, and it will be time consuming to correct. The green is dry now, and I've noticed some areas could do with a second layer. But I don't want the green to get too dark, so a glaze-like layer should work well. I thinned the Dark Angel's green with an equal amount of contrast medium, and painted a thin layer on any uneven areas. I want to pick out a couple more neutral colors for the rest of the fabric, and I thought Militarum green made a nice choice. I like to work section by section and flood the area with paint before soaking up any excess with the brush. Remember that contrast paint gets darker in the areas that it's thicker, and the brush deposits more paint on the model where it last touches it. So by controlling the direction you move the brush, you can control where the paint builds up and where it doesn't. It takes some practice, but with the right touch, you can get a much smoother result compared to randomly applying the paint. I'd like the Militarum green to be a little darker, so I applied a second layer. Next I painted Space Wolves Gray on any remaining cloth. I wanted to add another color to the models, and this gray has a nice blue tone to it. I think it complements the scheme and adds some extra color without being too overpowering. After that dried, I painted a second layer to deepen the color. I picked out the ropes with Xandri dust. And then I shaded them with Agrax Earthshade. Next I base coated any metal areas with Iron Hand steel. And after that dried, I painted a second coat for an even finish. I want to do something a little different on the steel, and I'm going to shade it with Gryph-Charger Gray. This gray has a blue-green tone to it, which complements the Dark Angel's green and the Space Wolves gray colors. Before moving on to the highlights, I need to add some definition to the models with some black recess lining. I thinned the black paint with an equal amount of water, and using a very sharp brush, I painted a narrow line between each layer of fabric. I also painted some in the sleeves and the underside of the robe. I like painting the black line before the highlights, because if I make a mistake now, it'll be much easier to correct. And for the final base coat, I painted all of the shields with Averland Sunset, making sure to leave a thin black line around it. It will need a second coat for an even finish. At this stage you could base the models and call them done for now. You could play some games with them and highlight at a later time. In most cases, that's what I would do with my army. but I'll move along and finish these to completion. I've found that if the models in my army take me too long, they're not likely to ever get finished. On a large army, time is the biggest constraint, and it's important to make the most out of our painting time. I like to try and think about which areas really need a highlight, and which areas I can get away without one. Contrast paints can often leave an uneven surface, especially on areas with a lot of heavy texture. The fabric on these models isn't ideal for this style of painting, so we have to even out the surface a little bit with glazing. I'm going to start off with the yellow fabric, and Averland Sunset is a really close match. I painted a thin glaze over any areas that look uneven, and any spots that need a touch-up. If you took your time with the base coat, this stage should be pretty quick. I want to paint one highlight on the edges, just something small that will make the detail pop without taking too long. I mixed some toxic yellow into the Averland Sunset, about equal parts, and painted a narrow line on some of the edges and corners. Next I moved on to the dark green areas, and first glazed over any uneven spots with Caliban green. The Dark Angel's green base coat ended up being pretty even, so this step went by really fast. I mixed a small amount of toxic yellow into the Caliban green and picked out the edges, about 3 parts Caliban green to 1 part toxic yellow. Then I thinned down some Fenrisian gray and highlighted the blue-gray areas. I painted a glaze in some spots, and a sharper edge highlight here and there. This color is less important in the overall scheme, and I think I could even avoid highlighting it entirely. For the olive green areas, I evened out the base coat with a glaze of Straken green. Then I picked out some of the edges with Krieg Khaki. Next I highlighted the edges of the bows with Bonewhite, and I also painted any stitching on the fabric. I highlighted the edges of the dark leather with Stormvermin fur. Even on the lowest of troops, I always paint the eyes in my armies. Eyes are one of those little details that can really elevate a model and make it look like you spent a lot more time on it. I like to consider the direction the eyes are looking in relation to the pose and what kind of story I want to tell. The last details are these little shields, and I painted over them with a couple coats of Yriel yellow. Small details like the shields are another great way of making your army look more impressive. A sort of low effort, high return kind of effect. With the yellow dry and looking bright, I took some Warpstone glow and painted a couple guidelines on the shield. Then I filled in the opposite corners. This green is way brighter than the rest of the model, so it should stand out more. Maybe these shields are issued by their lord and they have to keep them clean and polished, even if it means neglecting their other gear. Then I painted a thin black line separating the shapes. I highlighted the edges of the yellow sections with toxic yellow. And then I mixed some toxic yellow into the Warpstone glow and highlighted the edges of the green sections. Let's quickly paint up the wooden stakes and braziers for the regiment. I painted the coals with a generous coat of Imperial Fist yellow. Don't worry about being precise here, the next stages will get kinda messy anyway. After the yellow dried, I grabbed an old craft brush and dry brushed the coals with a very heavy layer of Troll Slayer orange. I'm trying to cover up almost all the coals, leaving a thin yellow line between them. Then I dry brushed the coals again with corn red, this time a little lighter and focused mostly near the top. Finally I dry brushed the coals with Eshin Grey, a little lighter than the last layer and focused near the top as well. Next I thinned down some black paint with water and painted over the metal parts of the brazier. I'm not worried about this layer being solid, it's just providing a darker base for the next coat. I painted the metal with Iron Warriors, leaving a thin black outline around the coals. Then I shaded the metal with Nuln Oil. I painted the wooden stakes and arrows with Skeleton Horde. Then I painted over the stakes with an equal parts mix of Contrast Medium and Wyldwood, avoiding the sharpened portion of the wood at the end. I painted the arrow feathers with Black Templar. Then I painted the chains with Iron Hand Steel. I shaded them with an equal parts mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. After the shade dried, I dry brushed the chains with Stormhost Silver. I painted a few archers a while back, and they're on smaller bases, so I'm going to replace those with the new size. Check out this video here to see how to rebase models. I used an old brush and applied a generous layer of wood glue to the bases. Then I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the bases with a coat of thinned Rhinox hide. Then I dry brushed the bases with Mournfang brown, followed by Xandri dust. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, and then shaded them with Agrax Earthshade. I painted the edge of the base black, and after that dried, I applied patches of static grass with superglue. I had a lot of fun painting these archers, and I can't wait to paint up the rest of this army. I have a good collection of some of the 5th edition models as well, and they might make an appearance. I'm still not sure about the rest of the heraldry for the army, but I'm leaning towards making each knight unique. What are your thoughts? Do you like the uniformity of painting everything the same, or do you think each knight should have their own colors? I'd also like to share that we just hit another milestone here and reached 10,000 subscribers, and that's a really amazing thing to see. We're also coming up on the channel's 1st anniversary, and I have some cool things planned for it. Thank you so much for making all this possible, for all your kind comments, for liking, subscribing, and for sharing with other like-minded people. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting.